Hi everyone, how are you doing today? So I'm going to spend the next 30 minutes talking to you a little bit about a problem that I encountered while teaching people digital psychology over the last several years. And during the process, I'm going to explain why you're at a conversion conference and looking at an Easter egg with Hello Kitty. I'm going to talk about what this has to do with designing value propositions and motivating users. So here's the problem. I've had a long career in behavior change. I started off designing social change campaigns for nonprofits, helping them to get people to do environmental behaviors, doing large-scale social change on the internet. I started in '97. I joined the UN. I did this for 7 years. Got bored, did a PhD, published on the subject, and I started teaching people. But throughout this, when people would ask me what motivates, I would say, well, there's a number of theories you can pick from. You take the best model that fits and you can work with it. I'll give my biases. There's not a single model I would not trash. There's normally good things about the models and bad things. But actually, a lot of people who are going to speak to you on stage don't actually have to know what motivates people. Because we're at a conversion conference. We just have to measure what works. We don't have to look inside the black box and answer why. And recently, I've started to find answers for the first time that started to really make a lot of sense. And I'm going to talk about how we can use concepts from evolutionary psychology, from neurochemistry, and use this to understand motivation and how to use motivation to trigger behavior. I did my homework, and I was told that from the survey, people wanted to have actionable results. And I'm going to go very quick. Very rapid fire, I'm going to talk about how to avoid psychological backfires, because when we're trying to evoke emotions, this can go terribly wrong if we don't do it right. So I'm going to talk about how we try and do it right and how to not tip into danger zones. Talk about motivation and neurochemistry. Talk about which motivational appeals can motivate, but which ones might actually demotivate. So how dopamine and cortisol can be used to design. We use them in the triggering of value propositions. When to use incentives versus threats, how to anticipate and manage marketing fatigue when your audience, they've heard your pitch many times. How to use stress to motivate and how to de-escalate. And so this is a great follow-up from the last question that was asked. Talk about a quick and dirty copy editing trick to help users form trust on your website quickly. Ways to appeal to user status and why flattery will get you everywhere, even your landing pages. So let's just talk about behavioral outcomes. So this is a model that I put together with a colleague, Dr. Agnes Steibe from the MIT Media Lab. And we wanted to take a look at one of the elephant in the room subjects that nobody talks about. And that's what happens when you use psychology in a way and it backfires, and it causes the worst possible outcome. So I'll just talk through the model just to set the stage so we can have a discussion about what works and where you have to be a little careful. So up here at the top, we have an intended outcome and a positive outcome. That's what we want to achieve. And so the model, most of us are interested in this, the target behavior. We want people to click on our buttons, to opt into our newsletters, to join our programs, to complete their checkout processes. But quite often, we might have some spill-off effects that no one's going to complain about, such as if we're doing, a marketing campaign, people get exposed to our messages, they come on our page, they don't buy, but still, we built some familiarity and maybe some trust in the process. And this can spill off in a good way later on. We might not have made the sale on this day, but it might be coming down the line. So this is it's a good outcome that accidentally came. Now we have the dark pattern. So that's where we intentionally try and evoke a negative outcome in someone. And you will probably know about this very quickly because your social media will fill up with resentful, angry people. So I know there's a lot of talk about dark patterns, but I think societies do tend to police themselves. And when people know that they're being duped, they will respond fairly quickly. People are not dumb. Your customers are pretty smart. And then here's the the crazy part where you never hear about this on stage in academic conferences. You hear about it in the bars. And that's where people design things that they backfire. So I remember, I think a few years ago, I saw Pep doing a video on horrible web design. And he talked about like using reverse social proof to show that no one cares about your product, as an example. Or trying so hard to establish trust, people saying, do I trust these people? Does anyone in here trust a person who says, trust me? And how about a website that tries too hard to win your trust? So you can backfire if you overdo it. So now I'm going to get to the meat, the bone. So I'm going to talk through this one slide, and then the rest of the presentation, I'm going to unpack it and show you what's going on beneath the hood. So this is an outcome of a model designed by evolutionary psychologists who said, you know what, maybe there's something to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Now, Maslow's hierarchy of needs is not really that well respected in academia. It's used a little bit more in marketing and sales and practice. Therapists wouldn't really touch it because it doesn't deal with like mental health issues and a lot of problems. But some evolutionary psychologists said, let's take a look at it and see if we can't tie it in with some of these concepts. Now, I'm going to talk through these, and I'm going to talk about some neurochemical correlates at each level of motivation. We're going to talk about how we use this as a basis for designing value propositions, and then I'm going to go into some of the motivational levels, because motivation is emotion. Emotion is motivation. I no longer see a distinction between the concepts. At the bottom of this model, people are motivated to deal with their physiological needs. So this is when if you don't have enough oxygen and water and food, your body is dying, your body is shutting off, and it will respond because it wants you to deal with it. And so you will get a dose of energy and cortisol, and you will be alerted into the fact that you have a problem. You do have to deal with it. Next up, we have self-protection. This is when a person feels vulnerable, insecure, unsafe, and you get that dose of energy to deal with a threat. And so at this level down here, self-protection and immediate physiological needs, that's where I'm going to talk about cortisol and the stress response. So next up, we have affiliation. So affiliation is our desire to connect with other people. We are social creatures. We feel connected when we're with others, and we can feel loneliness and isolation when we are disconnected. I'm going to talk about oxytocin at this level. Next up, status and esteem. This is the idea that we are as hierarchical as any other mammal out there. We have hierarchies. Psychologists have concepts of social comparison. We have other language to describe it for humans. So I'm going to talk about status and esteem motivators. And next up, mate acquisition, motivation to have sex. This was sort of missing from Maslow's hierarchy, and I considered it hard to imagine a motivational system that didn't include sex, because clearly there are a few children on the planet. And we have love, so connecting with another person, parenting at the top, and then because this is evolutionary psychology, it's all about selfish genes, so about our DNA moving on. So how do we use this as a framework for understanding how to evoke emotions and design value propositions? Well, it's easy. We look at two things. So we look at incentive. So an incentive is something that promises someone that they will have a survival advantage, that they will meet one of their needs. And I talked mainly through the positive side of this, because I love the book Meet Your Happy Chemicals, which is a nice book on the emotional response that we will get through different things in our life and the chemistry of it. But the book also talks a bit about the negatives, but not as much. No. When we talk about incentive, that's something we want. And so let me just talk through some quick incentives. So I am not entirely convinced that motivation at the level of self-protection and immediate physiological needs necessarily works best as incentive. Obviously, people want to feel safe, and they want to have their basic survival needs met. However, At this level, things can be about loss aversion. So with cortisol, with the stress response, the motivation is primarily about avoiding a threat, and that's what the stress response does. It alerts you, look, there's something bad about to happen, deal with it. Go out and solve it now. And so motivation, I believe, at this level can be a little bit more in the negative realm. Then affiliation, we're going to talk about how we motivate people to offer them a connection with other people, or we even connect with them ourselves. The flip side of that is feeling lonely. Then we have status and esteem, and I'll go into how we can use basic respect and politeness and appeal to people's status needs. So the question is, how can we trigger emotions to nudge users in the right direction? So I'm going to go through a couple of the neurochemicals. And so one is dopamine. So this is something that is triggered when we realize that there's a survival advantage in front of us, something that promotes our survival. This is a good thing for us. We should move towards it. This is the curiosity that we feel when something, it wakes us up and we think, okay, there's something there, I want to learn more. It could be interest, anticipation, and excitement. And this creates the movement towards something. This is one of the oldest value props in the book. I will teach you to be rich. I will make you rich. It's been working for thousands of years. It's a promise to someone. Money is a fairly good motivator because we can cash it in for many of our needs. Not everything, but it helps quite a lot. So we can look at a value prop as something where we say to a person, I am going to give you this survival advantage, but you have to do this. So in our most raw and basic form, we can look at a value proposition of, I will help you meet the survival need if you do this. And it's literally like an algebraic equation. I hear there's lots of descriptions of what a value prop is, but for me, it's a promise to someone that you will help them meet a survival need. And I'll talk about in the next mini session. It's also a promise that someone can avoid a survival threat. So when we try to trigger dopamine, we have to be worried about something called habituation. And I'll talk about that in a moment, but that's what happens when we have exposed people to too much. We've made our promise too many times. We've taken them through that cycle of promise and reward so many times that they fail to be motivated. If you eat the same dish every day, do you really get excited when dinner comes around? So we have marketing fatigue. But also, if things are too different and people can't recognize them, then at the same time, we might fail to motivate because people just can't recognize that there's a promise leading to something that they care about. And so normally we need a little bit of novelty where people recognize the offer, but it's a little different. And this is an unpacking video. Does anyone have toddlers? Does anyone have toddlers and in your mind you cannot understand why they were addicted to watching unpacking videos? Yeah, so unpacking videos can be a brilliant dopamine trigger. And what they do is they're videos where a person opens up a candy Easter egg, and then they show you what's in it, and you get to see everything in the prize. And then they open up another Easter egg, and they open up and they show you the prize. And then they open up another one, and so on. And so you always have this anticipation building. You're wondering, where's the toy that's coming next? What is it going to be? So, okay, unpacking videos might not be the thing for your audience, but here's a great way of building anticipation. So MailChimp gave me a t-shirt for being a good customer, a nice reward, and they were building anticipation in me, teasing out the product that's coming. Because remember, dopamine is triggered from anticipation of reward, but we habituate and we don't get rewarded after we get the thing. So you're going to get more mileage on anticipation than actual delivery. We'll have to deal with other reward systems then. So marketing fatigue, we have an impact we're trying to achieve, and generally we do lose it over time. If I was to show you slides, and there's not a lot of data out there because people hide this stuff, slides on the numbers of people who sign up for programs and drop out over time, right? That's an embarrassment, and we all know what those numbers look like. A lot of people do not put that out. It looks bad. It can be just self-discrediting. But marketing fatigue is a little slower. You might feel that in your email list. And so how are we going to deal with this? Is our offers are no longer triggering dopamine. So we have to deal with habituation. And so that's when the brain no longer responds to the rewards. And so here are a couple of tactics that we can use. So we can use novelties and surprises. We can offer more, make things bigger and better. We can, sometimes hold back the full story. Voltaire said the secret of being a bore is to say everything. We can slow down our outreach. So we might be hitting our market a little too heavy. And we might have to slow down, be a little more rare. And occasionally, I'll place an old wine in a new bottle. I'll do this, say I have a campaign I have to roll out. I don't really have much budget. Not much time to change it up. So we might want to do a quick repackaging at that point. So let me talk about cortisol, the stress response. So cortisol, this is triggered when anyone perceives a threat, and this can trigger stress. Possibly, if it goes on for a while, that stress can turn into anxiety. It normally triggers a lot of energy in a person and awareness, but if it goes on too long, it can decrease people's attention span and their ability to concentrate. And so this can spike a person into action. It can also backfire if we do too much of it. Let me show you why. So this is a fairly common chart showing a person's performance and their level of stress. So when stress is small, we have a good level of stress. It gives us a bit of energy, a little boost. When we have too much, it can go into a very unhealthy zone. And prolonged stress can lead to anxiety disorders. I mentioned low levels of concentration, irritability, a lot of negative emotional impacts. And the thing with cortisol is it banks up. So when you expose your user to, say, an unconventional design pattern, when you have a lot of errors on your sites, when you have ambiguity and confusion, you're not making these one-off mistakes, right, that the user will forgive. You're potentially banking up cortisol, and it doesn't dissipate, right, unless your user goes and runs around the block or goes to a comedy club to de-stress. You're actually making things progressively worse. And eventually, these things can add up and backfire. So I think of triggering cortisol as cooking with spicy food. You want a little bit of spice, but not too much, because it could potentially take you into the backfire zone. You want to build trust to reduce anxiety, but if you do too much trust building, you could potentially take people into the suspicion zone. So let's show you just a little bit of spice, not too much cortisol triggering. So here we have a very typical design pattern nowadays where I am on a travel site and they're trying to upsell me on their trip protection. So, they make it pretty clear this is the default. Yes, I'd like to buy the trip protection. But they make me say, no, thanks, I prefer to travel without trip protection. Of course, they rub the threat in your face. So it's a little bit of stress induction, not a lot. It's a subtle survival threat, but it's not over the top. Here we can step it up a little bit. Now, you're probably not always going to find a visual image that's as articulate as this one. And I probably don't have to spell this one out. But if we say, if you do X, you'll get Y. So is this triggering dopamine, anticipation of reward, or cortisol, the energy we need to avoid a threat? So let's talk about some of the backfires that we might be dealing with. So with unhealthy levels of cortisol, these are a couple of ways that we can cause user frustration and bank up their stress levels. So we can prevent people from reaching their goals. We can ask them to do things and make it so difficult with friction and all sorts of problems. We can add complexity. Ambiguity, I think this is an atrocious thing to have on any website. Not because of the friction, but because of the stress. Now, Pavlov actually used to induce nervous breakdowns in dogs by using ambiguity. And this was also used later in attempts to break down people in interrogations in military environments through ambiguity. Ambiguity can really bank up a lot of stress. And then we can sort of threaten people emotionally in many ways. There can be threats to their like social connections, their status. If you accidentally insult a user with humor, so like it can happen occasionally. Technology can be resented just as brands and corporations can. And we can arouse some very negative backfiring emotions in this way. So we have to be really careful. So I love the UI and design patterns used on MailChimp. And before you send out a MailChimp campaign, they understand that their users are feeling this. And it's the stress before you hit the button. It's like, what's going to happen next? And so with the ambiguous designs, you don't know what happens next. And so they have like a nice little animated image of a monkey with sweaty palms before pressing. So here are a couple ways that we can try and reduce stress so we don't have to deal with cortisol banking up. So one is we use Simplify Wizards, error-free design. Reassure people that they will meet their goals. I'll talk next about human contact, but if you can connect with people at a social level and trigger some of the oxytocin, that's a great stress reduction technique. No cognitive overload, reduce ambiguity. And I think the humor has a lot of good places in website design, but I think one of the best is when you might accidentally be triggering anxiety. So let me show you a couple of examples. So here we have Windows 10. Microsoft is trying to upgrade me to go to Windows 10 from the old. And so they're doing a couple stress reduction techniques, saying it's antivirus technology, anti-phishing, system tampering. And they threw in a little bit of a joke there, saying there's reinforced concrete as well. Here we have an error page on Twitter. And it's at least helping me move towards my goal by throwing in a search engine. I like this technique by Dropbox. So they're trying to dazzle me as I found this error. So they're trying to engage me some way. I think of this of like, when a kid's about to start crying because it hurt itself, and if you can get it laughing, it'll start laughing. But if it goes the other way, it's going to start crying. So I think of these tactics of like jump in, and these designers actually, jumped in with some good humor, so you can date Justin. Sorry, I had a double jump there. So these are fairly common design patterns that are used to evoke emotions, and I believe that I think it makes no rational sense why a picture of a lock will help someone feel more comfortable on an e-commerce checkout. But I'm absolutely certain that it does. And I've always wondered, why is this? It makes no sense to me. And I'll go with the Daniel Kahneman explanation, that the symbols in our life that have become associated with certain emotions and outcomes become triggers for us and can trigger those responses. So throughout our life, as we've seen like the impacts of locks and security symbols used in like secure environments, we build up these associations. And of course, sometimes people don't distrust your technology's platform, but sometimes it's the company, in which case these are very common stress reduction symbols to give people a sense of reassurance that you're an ethical company and you're following good practices. So I'm going to talk about oxytocin. So oxytocin is triggered through social bonds and interactions with other people. We have feelings of connectedness, of trust. I've been doing a fairly large literature review, tying together numerous studies. And there also seems to be some evidence that I think oxytocin might also be the us versus them neurotransmitter. Some research from nasal spray oxytocin in the Netherlands seem to show that oxytocin can increase distrust of outsiders and cooperation. So it's something that we can use to foster trust and loyalty. when we evoke it in the right way. And when people feel socially accepted, this can trigger oxytocin. People can also feel rejected and dejected, and this can really backfire because the pain of oxytocin, I think there's some evidence that it's actually felt physically. So how are we going to trigger this? Well, we want to establish a relationship with our users. And so what's very unintuitive and a lot of people are not aware of is that your users will quite often interact with your website, your technology, your mobile apps, with your brand and your company almost like another person. And that many of the principles that have come out of psychology from social psychological experiments can be run with a computer replacing one of the humans in the same study, and we get fairly similar results. So I always think of the source, defining yourself or your brand as first thing, because you want to have a relationship with your audience. Here we can use it in a funny way where this pop-up is saying, why'd you leave me? I don't understand. Why would you do that? So it's talking right at the user. This is a bit more in the playful realm, but hold on. This app, or this software, which I understood, said, we're sorry to see you go. So it's talking to me as if I'm another person. And look at this error message in Firefox. So it says, well, this is embarrassing. Is Firefox embarrassed? Probably not. What would this have said about 5 years ago? Yeah, it'd be like an error message. So when I write for the web, I write as if I'm inside the technology. And so it's like I have my head in, and I write, if it's an organization, it's about us and we and you, or if it's my blog, it's about me and I and my and you. And this can be a very good way of establishing that relationship and trying to build a warm connection with a person and to hopefully trigger that nice oxytocin effect. And so I'll quickly talk about serotonin, and then this will be the last section. So serotonin can be triggered in many ways, but the way I'm going to talk about now is in terms of status. So when we realize superiority, we obtain reward, social rank, we're climbing the social ladder. I think it says, we're coming up. And the argument in evolutionary psychology is that people who have status have more access to resources. It's almost it's like a proxy indicator that things are about to get easier for us. Life is going to be a little less work from now on. And the emotional impact is we feel important and special and confident. Now, I think there are very big backfires tied to this and very big risks, and that a lot of the mental health issues are tied up with serotonin. Some of the research that I've been doing shows that there's correlations to envy, people feeling a lack of power and control. So if you're doing anything to appeal to this, be very careful, because if you flip the backfires on this, they can really go in a bad way. So people will have sort of status-seeking behaviors. I think people of higher levels, they can be a little more risk-averse and loyal. So let's talk about how we trigger it in design patterns. So one of the most common things that you see as a common design pattern is social comparison, where people compare themselves to other people. And a lot of ranking systems are about that. So here on LinkedIn is trying to motivate me with a leaderboard type of design pattern, which we see in gamification. I had some of my customers from Estee Lauder were in one of my workshops, and I asked them if their marketing was often about sex appeals. I was totally wrong. They said, not at all. Our imagery is only about status. That's it. That's how Estee Lauder markets, and they understand it. We're given a reward from Dropbox after we upgrade, and they show us how we're going from the simple to the big world to show we're now stepping up the game. And here I'm just going to flip just sort of one last message. So websites can flatter people, and people will respond emotionally to fake compliments. When we talk about deception and manipulation, Flattery is that. It's a compliment designed to build up a person's emotions so that they have a positive feeling towards you or your company or brand, even though what you said has no basis. So it's an insincere compliment designed to get an outcome. And so researchers looked at the impact of compliments that are earned versus generic feedback versus flattery. And they found that flattery was pretty much getting people everywhere in terms of having a positive feeling overall, feeling more empowered, feeling they perform better. They enjoyed the interaction overall. They were more willing to continue, and they thought that it was pretty good software. So we see a lot of technologies or landing pages doing this, and like prompt pages. So here it says, thanks for your review. You're the best. And then try and get that good feeling flowing, and then they'll ask for something else, just a little bit more. And here on Booking.com, if you're a good bargain hunter and you get good deals, they call you a genius. And it's an earned compliment that should cause people to feel good when it's legitimate, but if they're calling people genius and they're actually not offering a good offer, it's flattery, it's manipulation at that point. They're trying to butter people up. So that is a wrap.